Gregory wants to know, how often should you change out hydraulic fluid and bleed the system? I once heard that it should be changed out every 5 years, but it didn't specifically come from a very credible source. Curious to know the facts. I own my 250 horsepower outboard with hydraulic steering for 8 years now and has never been changed since I owned it. Gregory, thank you for commenting and subscribing. This is a great topic. It's a great question. I mean, something that a lot of people don't even think about. But I also want to thank all of you who have sponsored this content. This content is brought to you by you. Those of you that have purchased a shirt, donated to the channel, or are a part of the Boaters program, you are the ones that fund this entire operation as far as the Boaters podcast goes. So we want to thank you for supporting us. Now, Gregory, as far as your question goes, I've been working on boats since 2011 professionally. So in that time, I cannot say that I have ever done a maintenance-related bleeding of a steering system. I never have, and I don't think that's really a thing. Like you said, you've had your 250 for 8 years and you've never changed the steering fluid. The only time you would really, we change and bleed steering systems is once there's a problem with it, but by the time, since it's hydraulic steering and it's just a hydraulic fluid and it's not really that bad of a system as far as the abuse that it takes and the pressure that it takes. It's just moving an engine back and forth. It's a very simple system. So the steering fluid doesn't really get as abused as you would think for it to go bad. It's not like in a car where it gets hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of time on it and go through all that abuse where you would need to flush it and change it out because it just breaks down over time. But in a boat, it doesn't see that amount of time for it to break down like that. Usually before the fluid itself goes bad or breaks down, you'll get a rubber component or a seal that is in the steering system, being the steering cylinder, the quad ring on the helm, or a fitting on the steering cylinder itself. Usually something like that is going to deteriorate and break down and cause a leak before the fluid goes bad in your system. So as far as when you should change out hydraulic fluid and bleed the system, I don't think that's really necessarily a maintenance thing. It's just the fluid does not break down that quick. Now, when we start talking about power steering systems, I have seen power steering systems where usually there's a failure related to it, just like in the regular hydraulic steering system when your O-ring or whatever fails and you might get some water in there or you're leaking fluid out and you put fluid in there and it contaminates the system, something like that. Other than those, it's a failure related thing. So if a pump breaks down or if a pump starts to overheat or you lose fluid and it gets low and overheats, that's when you start to see problems with the fluid and we'll have to bleed them out. Once fluid gets so hot, it will become it's a gunky substance. I mean, it's mud or a slime or a grime or it's a gooey glob of junk, basically, is what it turns into due to heat or contamination of a power steering pump starting to fail or getting water contaminated or something like that. At that point in time, then whenever we change out that pump or we change out the lines or we change out the steering cylinder, you'll pump all the old fluid out and then put new fluid in there, which is basically what you're saying, that asking when you should do it. So realistically, no, there's not really a maintenance thing that I know of or that I've ever done. Usually by the time we change the fluid out, it's because of a failure of something else within that system. So great question, and it's a good conversation. Good thought, because it is something that you would think about. You think fluids would be maintenance items, but on a boat, at least for the outboard side of things, maybe if you get into other stuff and then also the newer stuff. So on the Mercury 600, that one has a maintenance interval for the steering fluid. So now that you're starting to talk about those kinds of things, and then bigger boats with bigger diesels and more advanced steering systems, those might have a legitimate maintenance schedule to change out the fluid. But as far as your run-of-the-mill outboard, Sea Star, Beaver, Baystar, whatever steering system, there's not really that big of an industry or a need to do that. Busa Buck says, any way to check those forward and reverse clearances between pinion and the forward and reverse gears? So talking about rebuilding a gear case or how a gear case operates, and those of you that have been watching this channel for a while or have been into boating for a while, you kind of understand a lot of this. But in a lower unit, which is what changes it's your transmission, it's what shifts your engine into forward or reverse and changes the rotation of the propeller. The gears, there's a pinion gear on the top coming from the drive shaft from the engine, and there's a forward gear and a reverse gear, and those gears right there have a clutch dog in between them. The clutch dog goes into either or gear. As you shift it to forward, it goes into this one. Shift it to reverse, it goes into this one. And underneath a gear case, a lot of people don't know that a gear case is the gears inside the gear case, the gears, the bearings, all that stuff. For the most part, machining in 2024 and in the past 20 years, really, machining has gotten so good and so fine that you could virtually, I'll say virtually, take a gear case apart and change out any one of those components with a brand new component and have no problem with the gear case just putting it all back together and not having to worry about shimming or changing this or that, virtually and in most situations. But the gear case itself, that is where the problem is. So the actual case that all the gears and everything's in it, your lower unit, that case is what has the imperfections in it because it's being drilled out. So over time, drill bits wear out, drill bit speeds, a machine kind of, it's a machine. It's not always the exact same. So a drill bit drills in where the gear and the shims and all that stuff goes, and then it drills in a different spot, and how far in that drill goes, that's what, changes how far out this gear and this gear are going to be, whether they are closer to that pinion gear or whether they are farther away. That's what changes. So on basically every gear case, if you look where the anode is, there is a number there, a P, an F, and an R, and usually it'll have like a plus or a minus and then a number, like a 1, a 2, whatever. And that is telling you how far out of spec that gear case is. So if you change that case out, you have to re-shim that lower unit because the shims are going to be what changes, and those shims are what moves these gears either forward or backward, and you do need to check that. So in the case of this, is there any way to check those clearances? Yes, absolutely, and every lower unit is going to be different depending on how big it is. If we're talking about 300s, 400s, a 2.5 horse, or a 9.9 or a 50 horse, all the lower units are going to be different. And on top of that, the brands, Yamaha, Mercury, Suzuki, Honda, whatever you got, they're going to have different ways of checking these tolerances, but they're basically all the same ways, depending on the structure of the gear case. Usually those are with a dial indicator and a little tag. They call it a backlash tag or a backlash indicating tag or something like that. I can't remember the exact name for it, but it's a little thing that you put on like the drive shaft or the prop shaft, and you will move it back and forth. And that dial indicator, you'll put the dial indicator on that, and as you move it back and forth, those gears are going to be moving back and forth, and the teeth are going to be clicking. Those teeth are going to click together, and the space in between there, that's your tolerance, that's your backlash, that's what you are checking. Because if those gears are too close together and they don't have enough distance between them or enough backlash, then you're going to have too much friction and the gears are going to get hot, they're going to wear out, it's going to lock up the gear case. If they're the opposite way and they're too far away, then they're going to be chipping off the ends of it, and eventually you're going to grind the gears out, and it's going to be done that way too. So it's very, very specific on how close and how much distance is supposed to be in between those gears. Therefore, that's what those numbers are for. That's your tolerances. How to check them is totally going to vary depending on what lower units you got, what size engine you got, and what brand it is. And you'd basically just got to use a service manual. Even people that have been doing it for a long time, and even people that rebuild lower units. I mean, I guess if you rebuild lower units only, like if that's your only job, then you probably get to the point where most gear cases, you can do it without needing the manual. But for the rest of us, I've only rebuilt like 6 or 7 gear cases since the time I've been working on engines. So it's really, you just get the manual for whatever engine that is, and then just go step by step and check it. I mean, it's pretty, the process is pretty simple, but you just work the system. It's just a checklist, and you work that checklist. But very important that those numbers and those tolerances are correct, because if not, you're going to blow up a lower unit, and lower units ain't cheap. I mean, they go from $600 to $10,000. So it's definitely something that you want to be very, very cautious of if you're messing with that kind of stuff. So Purple Future wants to know, where does water come from in a fuel tank? Well, there's a lot of different places for water to get into a fuel tank. If it's just like a failure of not the tank itself, then there's only a couple places. So one is if you put ethanol fuel in your fuel tank and let it sit for a long time, you're going to have water in your fuel tank because of the ethanol fuel. Ethanol will absorb water from condensation from the atmosphere over time, and it will suck that in basically, and then it will separate and you'll have water in your fuel tank. Or the fuel sender on top of the tank, where your fuel gauge gets its reading for how much fuel you have in your tank. The fuel pickup, which is what picks up the fuel from your tank and then sends that to your engine, or the fuel fill or the fuel vent. Those are like the 4 things that are on a fuel tank that will be a place for, or a location of failure. So those 4 spots, if water gets on the tank and the fuel sender has a leak in it, it can get in through there. If the fuel pickup has a hole in it or leak and water gets on top of the tank, it can get in there. Or, your vent that vents the tank to the outside, if that's not done properly, water can get up in through there. Or the O-ring that's on the top of the cap, if your cap doesn't seal properly and it rains and water gets on there, water can get in through there. So I guess that'd be like 5 ways that you can get water into your tank, would be through those things there, being your fill, your vent, your sender, your pickup, or ethanol fuel. Now, as far as getting that water out, you just got to pump it out, but that's pretty much it for the water and fuel situation. Well, I guess, okay, we'll throw one more in there, and that's being that the tank has failed. The tank itself, whether it be an aluminum tank, a built into the boat fiberglass tank, or a polyurethane or plastic tank, if the tank fails, meaning over time, say you get ethanol fuel in your, you put ethanol fuel in your tank, you let it sit for 2 years, the ethanol is going to suck the water out of the air and the condensation, and it's going to build up into the tank. As soon as that ethanol connects with the water will pull out the corrosive properties of the ethanol, and then now at the bottom of the tank, that corrosive water is going to be corroding holes into the tank. So if it's a metal tank, you're going to have holes being eaten into the tank. Or if you get water into the fuel tank compartment and that water sits there, that water can also, same thing, over time it will get corrosive. Salt water, stuff like that can accelerate that process, but that will eat a hole in your fuel tank. And then once you get a hole in the tank, boom, there you go. That's how water can get in or fuel can get out. And then also a plastic tank, over, say, the time from expanding and contracting, the plastic will get hard and brittle and crack. So that's kind of the other side of that. So maybe there's 6. Maybe there's 6 ways that you can get water into your tank, and those would be it. James Threats wants to know, I wonder if you could Cerakote the flow path for less buildup, the cooling water passages inside your engine. That's actually a pretty good thought. I mean, a lot of the engines these days have gone through that issue. Like Yamaha in the early 2000s, they found out pretty quick with certain aspects and certain models that had corrosion issues, and then earlier models outside of that where they were not painting or coating the inside cooling passages. But for the most part, most of them, Yamaha and Mercury, I know for a fact, those ones, they do coat the inside cooling passages with a protectant. So whether that be paint or something else or the type of metal they use or whatever, there's usually a coating inside of there that helps protect that. Over time, that's going to break down. So is there a way to take a Cerakote or something like a ceramic or some sort of, protectant to run through your engine to recoat those passages over time? Like, let's say you got a 20-year-old engine, most likely most of the protectant, the paint or stuff like that inside of there, salt water and corrosive water, dirty water, the minerals inside the water, calcium, lime, whatever, depending on what kind of water you run your engine in, can eat away at the protectants that are inside the engine. So that's a good thought. I've never really thought about that. I've never even tried that. I mean, Cerakote is like a clear sealant. I want to say it's like I don't know if it's a resin or if it's like a paint or something like that. I mean, I think Cerakote's a brand actually, but I think it's a ceramic coating is what it is. But can you run that through your cooling system? I don't know. I mean, that's a really good thought. That'd be a really cool thing or a really good process if you could figure out how to do that. Not really sure how you would go about doing that. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. That's a really good thought if someone has the time and the energy and the dineros to put that kind of a project into some academical testing. That'd be cool. So if anybody figures that out, let me know how you did it, and that'd be a good way to help protect your engine and stop a lot of the issues that you see with not flushing the engine or corrosion in general, which is usually what kills a lot of engines. Older two-strokes and stuff like that, a lot of them mechanically, they last a long time. You do have to do some kind of rebuilds on them, and a lot of times that is because of corrosion. Like, water and corrosion is what ends up killing those engines. If you could prolong that and protect that, that'd be great. Kozar on the Creek says, "Hey brother, love your videos." Thank you, Kozar. I can play with boats all day too. Quick question: what fuel, octane, ethanol, etc., do you suggest for the two-stroke? Well, I don't really promote or suggest that you use ethanol in a boat, period. I mean, I guess I'll backtrack that one because yes, it's okay to use ethanol. I know a lot of people that do use ethanol in your boat. If you do, you need to use stuff like RevX, depending on how you use it. But they're running all of that fuel out of the boat within like a week or two. So people that are going offshore a lot and using their boat every other day or every weekend or something like that, they will put ethanol in the boat, but they're burning through an entire tank within a week to 2 weeks. So there's no time for that ethanol to be able to suck in water and create a problem for them. And then once they start not using their boat as much, then they'll use the non-ethanol fuel. But as far as the octane rating goes, the octane rating for most engines, most outboards, is a lot of them can go down to 86. Some of them are like capped at 89. Some are at 87. But by and large, most of them will go down to 87, 86 octane. Now, personally, I live in South Florida, and I've never even seen a non-ethanol fuel that is below a Rec 90 or a Rec 91. Usually everything's Rec 90. I do know that there are other places where people have seen like non-ethanol 87 or something like that. I don't know if it goes below that. Usually once you get below 87, there's not many octane places to get fuel at a lower octane rating than 87. That's why I think most engines pretty much can go down to 87, though there are some that can't. Like, I want to say it might be an HPDI that can only go down to 87 or 89, or maybe it's a 3.3 liter Yamaha. Like, there are specific models that they say not to go below 89. So you really just have to check with whatever engine you have for that. I don't suggest ethanol unless you're burning it up. And then also I would suggest using something like Ring Free or Quick Clean in order to help clean, the engine out, clean out carbon and other stuff like that. But as far as the octane rating, just put non-ethanol in the boat. You won't have to worry about it. And if you use ethanol, don't go below 87. Kind of like a suggestion. Again, if you're putting 87 ethanol in your boat, make sure that your model can handle that. And then also you're going to want to be draining your carburetors. If it's a two-stroke with a carburetor, you do not want that ethanol to be sitting in your carburetors or in your VST or basically any of your fuel system, because it's going to degrade the O-rings and the other components of the engine. You can't let it sit, even if it's a month. Like if you're letting your boat sit for a month or two, it's a bad idea to be using ethanol. You're asking yourself for a problem. So kind of two caveats there as far as octane rating. I feel like we talk about octane a few times lately, but for those of you that don't know much about octane rating, octane is a rating that is on the pump. So they put an engine through a test to get a number, and it is basically a fuel's ability to resist knock. So like if an octane rating gets down to 80, it will create a knock in the engine, which is basically the fuel is either exploding when it's not supposed to explode. So let's say that it's exploding at lower temperatures or lower compression ratios, or it's exploding after the fact. Like, your spark plug ignites and then that fuel is supposed to explode at that point in time. A low octane rating, that fuel becomes unstable, and the unstable fuel means that it can create a knock by exploding too soon or after the fact. So like, let's say, your spark plug goes off and the fuel explodes right here. But if this is your cylinder, it might explode over here, over here, over here, and it'll be like a sporadic spark inside of your cylinder, which can damage the piston. And you'll see that like in the failure once an engine fails, and you can pull the piston out and like see, if it's got like marks or like, you can see pitting and stuff running down the sides of the piston. That's like a detonation thing. So that's what octane is. And they get those numbers by running tests. Different places are different. You might have a rated octane number or a pump octane number. If you live outside of the US, a lot of them only use a rated octane number. And over here in the United States, we use a pump octane number. And they basically run a test where they take the fuel, they put it in an engine, and they change the RPM of the engine. They change the timing of the engine, and, they test it basically like that. And however, whenever the fuel becomes unstable, that's the octane rating of the fuel. So just a side note about octane rating. It's the ability to resist knock is what it is. It's unstable. The lower the octane is, the more unstable that fuel is. Keith Ridlin, I can't wrap my brain around how much resin I need to buy. I bought 2-gallon kit of epoxy to start, but I don't want to run out halfway through my transom. This guy's doing a transom, and no, you absolutely do not want to run out of resin or epoxy whenever you're doing a transom. If you think realistically how much you're going to need is going to depend on how big your transom is and how much you're doing. Like if you're just doing the outside shell, are you doing the inside as well? Are you doing it from the inside? Are you doing part of the stringers as well? Are you doing from the outside in? Like, how much of the transom are you doing? And that is going to tell you how much resin you're going to need. 2 gallons is going to be like, that's probably how much you will need to do most transoms. I personally mainly get a 5-gallon bucket opposed to, having buying it by the gallon. I just find it's easier to buy a 5-gallon bucket because you'll end up being somewhere, again, depending on the size of the transom, between 2 and 3 gallons, maybe 4 gallons, depending on the transom. So a 5-gallon bucket's probably the safer way to go. But if you've already bought 2, I would definitely get another gallon. And if you don't open it, depending on where you buy it, you can just take it back. So, get your money back and forget about it. But you definitely do not want to run out of resin when you're laying up a bunch of fiberglass, because if you run out halfway through, that is you got to start over. I mean, like it is a bad thing. You do not want that to happen. Jerry Q, have you considered an auto hookup like boat to trailer? What's your opinion of those? I usually fish alone and am considering for convenience. That's a really good question, Jerry. I've never personally used one of those. The boat to trailer or the Drodo, I think it is, and then there's another one, a Z hook or a something. I think it's an Australian thing where like there's like the hook, the bow of your boat has this like, I don't know, it's a weird like thing like this. And then there's a plat, so when you drive over your boat, boom, and it hooks like that. It doesn't need to use your bow eye, so it's like a separate type of bow eye. Can't think of the name of that one, but I've never used one, so I can't really give you firsthand experience or opinion on it. I can give you my thoughts, and I think it's a great idea, especially if you're older. Like if you're older and, laying over the bow of the boat and, trying to unhook the trailer eye or get in and out of the boat, depending on the ramp that you're at, the type of boat that you have, the type of trailer that you have, the type of bow, is there a trolling motor? There's a lot of variables. Are you launching solo that you might not be able to, if you're older, you ain't trying to get out on the trailer and try and run down and unhook the trailer and all that stuff. It can be a pain. So I think it's a good idea, but again, I don't know. There's a lot of variables there because I'm thinking about ramps. So like I could see where it wouldn't be a good idea where like, let's say that you go to a really steep ramp. So, if you're at a really steep ramp, you don't have to get your truck in the water because, the boat's going to start floating because the ramp is so steep. But how does that look when you go to hook up? Like when you go to run that thing out, if you're at a really steep ramp, will it disconnect all the way or could that give you a problem? I don't really know that situation. So I think it's a great idea where all you got to do is go up to the bow and click a lever and boom, it's good. But there are other ways to launch the boat without having to mess with that. Honestly, what I would do, but again, it depends on your ramp. So like on a very steep ramp, certain things are going to work where other things aren't. If the ramp isn't very steep, then, and you don't have a roller trailer, like you got regular bunks on your trailer, then you can just back the boat down in and right before you put the trailer in the water, get out, unhook your bow eye and hook a long line to the cleat. Or, you can, depends. There's people do it different ways. Some people hook it to the bow eye, but you're still going to have to get down and disconnect that. Other people just hook it to the cleat on the front. So you hook a really long line to that and run that line to your truck, back your boat down into the water. And then boom, whenever you hit the brakes, it'll slide right off the trailer. So you don't have to worry about that. You unhook it before you even hit the water. And then you just take that really long line and walk over to the dock. If you don't have a dock, then that's going to be kind of tricky either way because you have to do that long line there anyway. Like if there's no dock around and you're launching the boat, if you don't have two people, then yeah, you've got to put that really long line on there and then send the boat out, drive the truck up a little bit and then take the line and then pull the boat up and then climb in from the bow. So yeah, it could be a tricky situation, but I would say just doing the long line, again, a lot of it depends on the ramp that you use. So I like the idea. Super easy. You just walk up to the front and click the thing and it unhooks it and boom, drops you out. And then when you load it, again, super easy because you just pull right up on the trailer and click, boom, you're done. At the same time, you got to then put your trailer deeper down into the water. Like, if you've got like a bass boat or like a bay boat, something like that, that might get a little bit tricky because it's a shallow boat. Flats boat, stuff like that. So, you got to make sure that the trailer's down in the water enough for it to work right, which could get tricky putting it on the trailer, but kind of my thoughts there, Jerry. Hope that helps a little bit. Luis Roebuck says, hi, great technical information. Got a question. I know how to eliminate the VRO on Yamaha's 40 and 90 horsepower and mix my gas with oil. So far, no problem. My concern is how safe it is for a 225 horsepower saltwater series. Thank you. Well, it depends if we're talking about a OX66 or the carbureted system. So like if it's carbureted, I don't know if a carbureted one might be the same exact thing. 225 is a pretty big engine to be premixing because there's no variables there. So normally on like these bigger engines at wide open throttle, it's providing more oil. Whereas when you premix it on a 90 horse, it's, there's not really that much of a difference. It's a 50-to-1 ratio is generally going to be plenty of oil across your RPM band. So from, 600 RPM idle to 5,500 RPM wide open throttle, it's enough oil. But you start talking about these bigger engines, a 225 premixed, there's no variance in how much oil is getting to it. I would be concerned if it was an OX66, mainly because the OX66, it premixes the oil into the VST, and then the VST feeds it to the injectors, which are on the front of the throttle body, and then it goes into the engine, and then it goes through it. But there is an O2 sensor, so if the O2 sensor gets all oiled up and floods out, it will lean out the engine, and you could have a potential problem there. So, that's kind of my thought there. The 225 premixing carbureted engine, I mean, I'm kind of a fan of the oil system, so I'm going to probably say that I wouldn't do that. Theoretically, could you do it? Yes. Same thing for the OX66. Theoretically, you could premix it and it'd be fine because it shoots the fuel and the oil in at the throttle body, which means it lubricates everything. Whereas like an HPDI or something like that with direct injection, if you take away the oil system, then you are no longer oiling the rest of the engine. You're only shooting it into the cylinder, which you're going to blow up the engine. So, there's that caveat there. But once you start talking about 225, 250, because it's a bigger engine, it's a bigger block, it needs more lubrication. So will a straight premix do it? I mean, yeah, I think you're going to be all right because we'd premix a Johnson Evinrude 250 and had no problems with that. But you might want to go a little bit heavy on it because if you go lean, you're running a risk there. I would go a little bit heavier on the premix. So I ran a 250 Ocean Runner, which is a Johnson, and I premixed that thing, but I premixed it heavy and I changed my plugs out a lot more frequently. I didn't have any problems there. So the 225 saltwater series carbureted, if you premixed it and premix it heavier and don't worry about, your plugs, you're going to change your plugs out more often, then theoretically, no, you're not going to have any issues. Doug, hey Captain, sorry I missed the live. Curious what your thoughts are on the used boat market. Looking for 25-ish center console higher end models, bro. Keyword. Do you feel sellers are starting to come to their senses yet on asking prices? So we're going to have a little bit of a discussion here because you're saying you want a higher end model. So higher end model means more money. Like, you want quality, you're going to pay for that quality. Are you going to overpay, for certain brands and buy a brand name? Some brand names come with a price. Like if you're going to buy a CV, a Boston Whaler, a Scout, a Chris Craft, if you're buying a Regulator, you're buying these high-end brands, you're getting top-of-the-line quality, but you're paying for a brand name at the same time. So you're wanting a higher end model, you're going to have to pay for a higher end model. Like there's not really much of getting around like getting a cheap deal on, something like that. But as far as the sellers are going, yes, for sure. The used market, people are getting out of boating. People are selling their used boats. They are coming down right now. It's kind of tough to sell a boat. It's more of a buyer's market right now for a few reasons. One, you just had 2 hurricanes that went through Florida, so people are still working on fixing houses, cleaning that up. Everybody's working. Electricians, plumbers, drywallers, cleanup crew, landscaping people, like all of your service industry people, everybody's working, trying to get everything up and going. So there's not as many people looking to buy a boat. Plus, it is November in Florida, and in November, people aren't buying boats. Come December, January, when you get all the snowbirds, more people are buying boats. So yes, down here right now, for sure, it's more of a buyer's market and people are coming down. At the same time, though, when you're saying sellers starting to come to their senses yet on asking prices, you also have to take into account that we just went through a 3-year 22% inflation rate. So over the past 3 years, inflation has gone up like 22%. So that amounts for a lot of things. People are paying 22% more for anything that they buy than they did 3 years ago. And on top of that, that transfers over to manufacturers and boat builders and everything else, with everything that they're buying is now 22% more than it was 3 years ago. So inflation on the economy, it's not necessarily that people are coming to their senses. It's just that everybody's not making near as much money as they were, and they're spending a lot more than they were. And so when you're broke, you're broke. Like you can't give a discount when you ain't got no money. You know, it's better to just keep their boat than sell it, because you're not going to be able to replace it. And it's kind of that situation too. So, you know, don't think it's that people are just asking ridiculous prices. I'm not saying that they aren't. I'm not saying that boat prices are not astronomically high. And that was mainly due to, you know, shutting down for everything, COVID, everybody buying boats, all the manufacturers ran out of boats, and then you hit inflation on top of that. So if you look at the boating industry as a whole over the past 5 years, you can see kind of a trend in how we got to where we are as far as the used boat market is. You know, everything got shut down. No one was working. All this money, $6 trillion, got pumped into the economy. And then you had all these people that couldn't do anything that had all this money. So they went out and bought all these boats. When they bought all these boats, all the manufacturers ran out of boats. So then they started to amp up production and build as many as they could build. And then they got 2-3 years behind. And then boom, you hit the 22% inflation because you printed $6 trillion. And we get to where we're at. So not to mention policies and other things like that. But because of that swing right there, prices are high because they're high. It's not like people are over asking. Though some people are over asking, they're just throwing numbers out there trying to get as much as they can get, because they're looking at what things were 2 to 3 years ago when everything was selling like a hotcake, and it was just, you know, everybody was paying stupid prices. You know, if someone wanted a boat and someone offered $100,000, the next person that wanted that boat, because you had maybe 10 people that want the same boat, and it's like a bidding market where they just keep asking. I'll give you 100, 110, 120, 125, 130. Next thing you know, somebody's paying $150,000 for an $80,000 boat. So it's all messed up. But yes, it's definitely coming down, definitely softening in the market. ES1 says how to check the antenna VHF on a yacht if there is NEMA. I mean, a VHF antenna is a VHF antenna. Is it digital or is it analog, or not analog, but just does it have a, an RJ45, or that's not it. A PL59 or something like that. Is it the regular connector or is it a digital connector? Those are really the only two things. But as far as NEMA is concerned, NEMA is kind of like separate from that. Like, unless you're using like an AIS with a different antenna, but for a regular VHF antenna, to check it, you could ohm it out. So we're using your ohm meter. You can ohm it out of the cable from the inside piece of the cable to the outside sheathing of the cable. There's the two metal pieces. You can ohm it out from there. And then also, I would just get a cheap antenna from somewhere and plug it in, see if it works. If it works, then boom, your antenna's bad. But other than that, your VHF antenna is just an antenna. It's going to feed into something, and then that something is going to be what uses your NEMA 2000 or your NEMA. So like, if you got AIS, or you've got a more intricate, multiple different VHF radios that are integrated into your network, then the antenna is going to go to a box or a hub or the radio. And then from that, you'll get the NEMA 2000 that'll go to all the other components that might want access to use that antenna. So you're asking two different questions about two different things there. Hotshot says, what's a better flush? Run on a hose with muffs for 15 minutes or flush through flush port with engine off? Any sense in using salt away when using muffs? When flushing on muffs and running the engine, I usually flush when I get back home a few hours after use or the following morning. First of all, let's talk about salt away and what salt away is. Salt away is basically a product that dissolves salt. So if you use salt away, you only use it for like a minute or maybe two. So like if you're flushing your engine, you are going to be flushing it with fresh water, and you want to flush it for 15 minutes. You didn't say what kind of water you're in, but either way, that's different. The salt away dissolves the salt. So as soon as you put the salt away in there, you need to stop putting it in there. So like you hook up your thing with the salt away, you run it through the engine. As soon as the salt away is done, like it's empty, the container's empty, or there's just a smidgen left in there, you need to shut the water off and let it be. Like that's it. You can't, run it on. So if you take your salt away, hook it to the engine, hook it to your water source, and then flush for 10 minutes, and in the first 2 minutes, it runs the salt away through the engine, then the salt away is gone and the fresh water is now flushing the salt away out of the engine, and you're washing the engine, you're washing the salt away out. Whereas when you run it for a few seconds, then that salt away gets left behind and then breaks down the salt and dissolves it and basically gets rid of it. So that's kind of how that works. Like if you salt away your boat, you just spray the whole boat down and then you leave it. You walk away, you don't rinse it off, none of that. You just leave it and it dries streak free and dissolves all the salt, and boom, that's how that works. As far as on the muffs versus the flush port, obviously, if you run the engine on the flush attachment, that's the best way. I mean, if you wanted the best way to do it, you need to go get a bucket and put the engine in a bucket and then put the flush, your salt away, dilute it into your bucket with all your water, or not even really do that. That would disregard that. But run it in a bucket for 10, 15 minutes. That's going to heat it up. It's going to open up the thermostats, and then take your flush attachment. Once you've done that, and then run the salt away through it for another minute, your thermostat's going to close because it's going to cool down, but you leave that salt away in there, and that's going to be the best way. Obviously, that's a lot of work, and a lot of people don't want to do that, and is it really that necessary? Depends on what engine you have and how much, what kind of water you run in. The flush attachment is not going to open up your thermostat, but in most cases, especially now, most engines are designed where the thermostat just dumps into the exhaust. When you flush your engine on the flush attachment, it runs through the entire engine, including the exhaust. So the only thing that is not getting flushed is the backside of the thermostat and that little cavity that dumps into the exhaust. Most engines, it's not going to matter if that thermostat opens or not, because the thermostat is a serviceable item. You throw it away in 300 hours anyway. So does the thermostat need to open or not open? Depending on your model, for the most part, it's not going to matter whether it opens or closes, because the water's going through the exhaust, and a lot of them just dump from the thermostat into the exhaust. So you're not really missing anything there. On other models, maybe some of them have a hose that go down to a fitting, like on older Verados, the L6 Verados. That's what that is. It dumps out the thermostat down into a dump, and over 20 years, you might have a problem with that fitting at the bottom corroding, but everything under that, when you flush it, that's all the exhaust. That's all getting flushed out anyway. So the only thing you're not flushing is that one fitting and a hose, which is a rubber hose. So you're not really concerned about that. But actually, there's another one. Someone else, Tiara Rich Marina Del Rey. Do you recommend flushing with salt away when you use the boat in salt water? The literature says flushing with salt away requires only 2 or 3 minutes, leaves no residual, and is 10 times better than freshwater flush alone. Thoughts? Exactly like I said, that's what salt away is. So if you freshwater flush your engine for 10 minutes and run it to open up your thermostats and flush it out, if you want to do that, you can do that. And then the last minute or two, hook up to the salt away, run the salt away through there, shut it off, and that's how that's going to work. So that should help you too, Tiara. Living Liang, my C-Star hydraulic helm has click sound when I'm turning it, and I can see corrosion through the filling hole. It slowly fall other side when engine tilt up, but no movement when push the outboard by hand. It is also fine when driving. No any problems. Do you think I should remove the helm and clean the corrosion inside the helm, or just leave it like that? So, no, I wouldn't. As far as cleaning the corrosion in the helm, the problem is that you're dry. Your clicking sound is the helm. It's dry. It's out of fluid, and all those gears and stuff that is inside the helm, all that stuff's exposed. There's no fluid there, and that's what's clicking. So yeah, you need to fill that thing up, because you got a leak somewhere and you're losing steering fluid. As far as cleaning the corrosion up, I don't know if you're not going to be able to get into that helm and clean it out. What you can do is just kind of back to our first question of flushing the fluid, you can fill it till it's full, run it, and all that corrosion and stuff, as you run it, it's going to eat all that up. Then you can flush your system out, drain the fluid to get the dirty fluid out. But you've also got a leak somewhere that's leaking fluid. As far as the engine falling over to the side, that is either the helm or the steering cylinder. It's really a 50-50 on that one, because there are check valves in both the steering cylinder and in the helm that, run the fluid one way or the other way. So when you turn the engine, the fluid runs in this direction. When you turn the opposite way, the fluid runs in the opposite direction. And so on the cylinder, it has a ring in there that makes sure that those fluid they stay on each side. And then at the helm, there's little check balls that, stop that flow. Either the steering cylinder has a leak in it, so when you trim it up, the weight of the engine over time is able to push the fluid one way or the other and lay over to the side. But at the same time, it could also be the steering helm where the weight of the engine is making that cylinder push over, and it's going to open up that check ball that's inside your helm, and that's going to let it to fall over. So it's really a 50-50. I would probably start with the steering cylinder and change that first. But yeah, as far as it falling over, that's the problem with that. The clicking, you're low on fluid because you got a leak. So fill up the steering system, find your leak, and then fix your leak. If that doesn't fix the engine falling over, then then you're gonna have to get a new helm or a new steering cylinder, one of the two. Muhammad says, hi, I have a 40-foot boat with 350 horsepower Mercuries. We go for live bait trolling a lot. We run from sunrise to sunset. I'm thinking of adding a small 25 horsepower outboard for trolling, time to save on engine time and service. But how can I control the small engine from the console and to use the steering wheel for the small engine? You got a couple things here, Muhammad. For one, you're talking about a 40-foot boat with triple 350s on the back of it. This is a big boat. This isn't, this ain't a small boat. When we start talking about kicker engines like a 25, I don't know what you're trolling either. So like, depending on what you're trolling for, if you're just idling around and throwing cast nets trying to catch bait or something like that, why don't you just get a smaller boat to run and get bait with? Like, if you're running a 40-foot boat and you're using that to get your bait, you should just get a cheap, dumpy, busted looking bait boat. Like that's what a lot of people do, is you go buy a $1,000 boat and use it to go get your bait, and then take your bait, put it in the live well of the engine and of the 40-footer, and then go fishing. Because I don't think hopefully you're getting bait, and then I don't know how far you're running. I don't know the setup that you got going on there, but getting a bait boat might be better off for you. Now, as far as using the 40-footer, because I do know there's some people that they want to get the bait into the same live well. So I know some fishermen that they don't want to transfer bait. So they want to go get bait and they want to put it into one live well, and they want the bait to live in that live well until they use the bait, and it keeps it longer. And I don't really know whether that's something or not. I've been told that. I know people that do that. So if that's your situation, then okay, whatever. But 40 feet and a 25 horsepower engine, people that use kicker engines are normally using it on a 25 or like a 27, and you got a 9.9, a 15, or a 25 on one of those things that you can let it down. It's not a jack plate. It's got a real name that's not a jack plate. It's a trolling motor, whatever, kicker motor. You're going to need something like that to put that on there. So if you're just trying to take a 25 horsepower engine to idle around somewhere and use your engines to make them steer, the way it's done is that your tie bars that tie all your engines together needs to have something that links to that to your kicker engine, so that way they can turn. But in this case, you're not running your engines. So if you turn your engines off, those 350s, it's going to turn off the power to your power steering pump. As soon as you lose power to that, the thing's going to steer like a Mack truck. It's not going to be what you think it's going to be. So you also would need to rig your power steering pump to also turn on either by a switch or leaving one of the engines running. So that way your steering pump stays active and you can steer the engines back and forth using your power steering pump, with the kicker motor having a bar fabricated between the kicker engine and your tie bar on your regular engines to use the steering wheel that's at your helm. A lot of fabricating needs to be done for this, and a lot of configuring needs to be done for this. And on top of all that, I don't know if a 25 horsepower engine is going to be enough to do what I think you're trying to do. For one, it's not going to be trolling speeds. Like if you're talking about trolling, like you're trolling for like, fishing and not for bait. Like if you're trolling for bait, you're saying that you are just like idling around somewhere and throwing a cast net, whatever. That's going to be different than like trolling. Like I hope you're not trying to use the kicker engine to troll, because it ain't going to go fast enough. You ain't no way you're going to get the engine to go fast enough to troll with, because it has 350s on it. Like it needs that horsepower. So maybe I'm not understanding exactly what you're trying to do, or maybe I have figured out what you're trying to say, and those are what your complications going to be. 25 might not be enough to do what you're trying to do. I don't know if the 25 is going to move the boat around the way you want it to move. But you could also get a trolling motor too, not like a 25 horsepower, but get a bigger trolling motor and put that on the front and then use that. But again, I'm not really sure what's going on here with this one. Jack says, are the Yamaha 425 and 450s as reliable as the F300 and down the horsepower range? I have had Yamahas my entire life from 90 to 250 and have never had a problem. Only thing I spend money on is to service them. Not much out there on their new V8s, given the F350 V8 didn't go as planned for Yamaha. Would love to hear some of the 450s issues. Well, as far as reliability is concerned, Yamaha's across the board from the 450 down to the 2.5, they're reliable. Like Yamahas are reliable regardless of what you got. The problem that I see, or that I can think of with the 425s and the 450s, is down the road. I think that the 425 and the 450, in my opinion, is going to get the same rep that the HPDI got, and that is because of future issues. So just like the HPDI, you have a very intricate fuel system. So it's more complicated than your average person. It's not like a regular old EFI. You got 45 PSI fuel pressures. Your injectors are opening and closing. You're good to go. It's not like that. It's direct injection, high pressure. You cannot check the fuel pressure without a computer. And like on the 425, 450, it has 5 fuel pumps on the engine. So those 5 fuel pumps, you are potentially looking at problems. So if you have bad fuel, poor fuel, water in your fuel, dirty fuel, any of those things, ethanol in your fuel, any of those things are going to create a future problem with those engines. And it's not going to be cheap. So like today, if you got a brand new 450 and you go and put 2,000 hours on that thing, you're probably not going to have any problems at all. Like there's not like this massive, oh my goodness, look at this thing is a massive failure. It's a solid, reliable engine. And even the F350 after Gen B came out, that was a pretty reliable engine. Well, I mean, it was a reliable engine. So, the old V8, that first flagship model was kind of had some problems, but after that, yeah, it was harmonically imbalanced. The firing order was messed up, but other than that, it wasn't like it was an unreliable engine. The 450s, I think, are going to be super reliable, but 20 years from now, and then also based on poor fuel quality, you could run into expensive repairs. I'll put it that way. Again, we're talking about 5 fuel pumps, and the injectors are withstanding, it's got like 3,200 PSI, a wide open throttle of fuel pressure. So if you run a bunch of ethanol and dirt through the fuel system, you're going to mess up those pumps, and those injectors ain't going to be cheap. So if you get a batch of bad gas, that could realistically cause you some expensive repairs that I think people are going to be complaining about. So 10, 15 years from now, people that get bad gas, water in their gas, all this kind of issues, they're going to be the ones that are going to be, having issues with the 425, 450. And they're going to be out there saying, oh, this is a terrible engine, this, that, and the other thing, even though the engine might have 3,500 hours on it, and it's because you just ran water through the fuel system. So that's kind of my thought on that as far as an issue with it. Other than that, the engine's great. there's not a massive problem with it out there. J Yo says, is there a difference between 10W30 or 40 4-stroke oil for a wave runner versus an outboard? I'm not a PWC expert, but as far as I know, yes, there is. There is a difference between your outboard oil and your PWC oil. So like, as far as the weight goes, yeah, 1030 and 1040, 1030, 1040 is 1030, 1040. It's not a big difference in the weight. But the buildup of the oil, from what I understand, of the outboard is way different than the PWC based on its usage. So in a PWC or a wave runner or whatever you got, you're talking about really quick acceleration, water contamination potential. You're talking about those high RPMs and higher heat temperatures. And like, let's say it's more abusive. Like a wave runner gets way more abused than your outboard. Your outboard is just bolted to the side of the back of the boat, and it's just running along through the water. It's not, it goes up and down with the waves. It trims up and down like this. It might come off a wave and go like that. But by and large, the thing's just sitting here like this. So, and it's pretty consistent too. Like it stays at the same temperature. Even if you slam the hammer down, it still takes, it takes a little bit to get up on there. Whereas with the wave runner, you're just wide open throttle. Like you're instant. And then it's going over waves. It's coming up like this. It's like this. It's like this. Like you're flying all over the place. So it takes a lot more abuse. So I want to say that the PWC oil is built with that aspect in mind, whereas the 4-stroke oil isn't. So that's the only difference that I really know about. And I'm not even 100% on that because I don't know that much about PWCs. And I'm not a chemist. I don't really know the chemical makeup of oil and all the different properties that it has and all that kind of stuff. But those are the two main differences that I can think of that I know are like PWC is for this and outboard is for this, because those two massive differences.